So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're doing a recap of Florida's 2022 legislative session. My name is Deborah Martin, and I'm FCAN's policy analyst. I'll be your host today. I'm so pleased to welcome today's presenters, both members of the Florida legislature, as we have some informative discussions about important legislation they both championed to expand educational opportunities and affordability metrics throughout our state. Before we get started with today's presentation, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, we welcome your questions. This is all about learning together, so please submit your questions through your dashboard. You can submit them at any time during this webinar, and I do encourage you to do so as we go through these conversations. Then we'll answer them towards the end of our presentation. Second, please share what you're learning on your favorite social media website. We love to hear what's resonating with you. And then finally, this webinar is being recorded. All materials will be available within a week of the recording. I know we have quite a few listeners today who may be new to FCAN's work. So to give you a little background on who we are, FCAN's mission is to lead the collaborative movement to ensure every Floridian achieves an education beyond high school and a rewarding career. Our vision is to see a Florida working together where education is the pathway for economic mobility for all. And we do our work in three central ways: through research and data, shining a light on promising practices at the local and state level through our LCANs, and through 4 statewide initiatives that provide schools and community organizations with free resources to help our students continue their education beyond high school. FCAN's work is guided by our 7 conditions for success, which are listed here and you can find out more about on our website. Today's webinar provides great examples of many of these conditions, particularly opportunity for everyone, affordability, and community collaboration. So to get started really quickly, I'd like to go over some details regarding Florida's legislative session. The legislature convenes for 60 days every year. This year they started on Tuesday, January 11th and adjourned on Monday, March 14th after they extended for 3 days to vote on our state budget. We'll have more on the budget soon, but lawmakers passed a historic $112.1 billion budget and a total of 275 bills. Major policy changes include additional efforts to unify workforce education initiatives, substantial modification of the state's standardized testing system, and the creation of a new nursing program to address a critical workforce need. I'd like to point out that unless otherwise indicated, all bills discussed today, along with the budget, are waiting for the governor's signature. And today we'll discuss some of these exciting bills with our special guests. Right now, I'll turn it over to Nicole Washington to provide some background and introduce our speakers joining us today.
Thank you, Deborah, and welcome everyone. I'm Nicole Washington. I'm the Chief Policy Consultant for the Florida College Access Network, and really excited to introduce our 2 esteemed guests today. So first we will have Senator Perry, who is from Senate District 8, which is Alachua and also parts of Putnam and Marion County. If Ian Fletcher is on, we have good representation in Alachua, one of our LCANs there. Senator Perry is the chair of the Criminal Civil Justice Appropriation Subcommittee, vice chair of Transportation, and also served on Agriculture, Criminal Justice Policy, and Transportation and Economic Development Committees. He sponsored several bills, everything from broadband infrastructure to music education, and clearly has a passion for music education and fine arts. Fun fact that I got from one of your aides, Senator Perry, is that before you were elected, you actually helped install the roof on the Capitol in Tallahassee, which is very cool. Hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about that later. And then we also have Representative Mariano from House District 36, which is Pasco County. She was the chair of the Post-Secondary Education and Lifelong Learning Subcommittee, and also served on Education and Employment and Higher Education Appropriation. Fun fact for Representative Mariano is that she was elected to the Florida House in 2016 when she was still an undergraduate at UCF, and has been serving for the last 6 years. clearly a champion for our students. So I'm excited to have you both, and I will kick it back over to Deborah.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for introducing our guest today. So now we're going to turn it over to Senator Perry. So obviously, good afternoon, Senator Perry. Thank you for joining us today. Ideally, really want to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 722 that you sponsored, Education for Student Inmates. But before we get into the context of the bill, if you don't mind telling us and our audience here a little bit about your district.
Sure. So District 8, now that will change in the new districts quite a bit, but not geographically too much, but it will on population and stuff. So right now I represent all of Alachua County, the city of Ocala North, so northern Marion County, and all of Putnam County. I have, I think it's 95 or 96,000 students in higher education in my district now. So I have the University of Florida, Santa Fe College, the College of Central Florida, and St. John's College. So a lot of students. My youngest one just graduated last week from UF, and my older one graduated a few years ago. So certainly in higher education, it's kind of a little different because my father was a professor at the University of Florida. I had a brother and sister graduate from there. I didn't go to college. Tell people I barely made it through high school. So I just started working in a business when I got out of high school in the roofing industry, and I've done that. My resume is pretty short. I've had worked for my own company for 45 years, and I've been a legislature. So short resume. But a little bit of background. I don't know how long you want me to go on this, but I can tell you that one of my passions has been criminal justice reform. I've been working on that. I helped found a prison ministry program in Gainesville about 25 or 26 years ago, where we would take men, and when they were being released from prison, we'd provide them with housing and mentorship opportunities, job placement, a structured environment for that. And we've expanded that where we now also take women coming out of prison. And that's, I was a founding president, served in that capacity for about 14 years, and then got involved with politics and gave that up. Still involved on the peripheral with that. So anything to do with both education and certainly doing stuff with education that relates to the criminal justice system has been a priority for me.
I think that's really awesome. And obviously we'll kind of get more into it, but I think that tends to be an overlooked population, which I'll address soon. But so I think it's very nice to hear, obviously, the work that you've done over the years to address a lot of need in this area. So obviously, as you see on the screen, one bill you sponsored this session was Senate Bill 722. Can you tell us a little bit about what the bill does and the impact it'll have on increasing access to post-secondary credentials for those in our state's correctional system?
Sure. And I was looking at your screen. It's kind of that picture of me. They kept complaining because I did not have a jacket on, and they kept wanting me to get in and take a jacket. That jacket is superimposed. They ended up drawing that. They did a pretty good job. I'm looking at that jacket. It's
Oh, really?
So I never submitted one back to them, so they took it in their own hands. So 722 is it's a pretty simple bill. It expands state colleges can go into the Department of Corrections for class instruction and certification. Two parts of the bill. One, it does that. The other one, it allows the education to take effect in county jails as well. So one of the difficulties with county jails is the amount of time. It's under a year. There's still an opportunity, I think, there from an educational standpoint, but it's certainly not going to be, you have to cram everything into a short window of time. Some people are staying longer than a year with COVID, but typically if you're sentenced to a year or longer, you're only there for a while, then go into the Department of Corrections. So, but look, and we can talk about this for quite a while. We have a captive audience in the Department of Corrections and the county jails. I was just talking about this to somebody else. If you think about successes that people have, there's a lot of common denominators of failure and success. Fatherless homes. If you went to the Department of Corrections and interviewed 100 inmates in there, you'd probably find 90 of them didn't have a father in their home. So that means there's not a lot of structure in their lives. Simple things like doing chores as a child leads to, is another common denominator. If you had chores as a child, you're more likely to be successful than kids who didn't have anything to do at home. So the way I look at this is we have an audience there that probably did not, the majority of didn't have what you and I or any of your participants would consider a normal childhood. And so for them to be successful, now they're in Department of Corrections, for them to be successful post-release is depending on what we do while they're incarcerated. And so I look at it as an incredible opportunity to go in and help change. And if you think about, what the behavior that we want people to exhibit once they're released, we have to have them exhibit that behavior while they're incarcerated. You can't have someone who's not done anything for years, productive, and then be able to go out in society. So from a work ethic, it's atrophy. Your muscles atrophy if you don't use them. Your brain atrophies if you don't use it. The average person probably listening is going to make 500 or 600 decisions in a day. You're going to wake up, you're going to decide what clothes you're going to put on, what shoes you're going to put on, what you're going to eat for breakfast. You're going to start making decisions until you go to bed. You're going to you're decide what time to set your alarm clock to get up the next morning. People in prisons make 15 to 20 decisions in a day. And so they can communicate pretty well verbally, but performing sometimes what you and I would think is just routine, basic menial task, work task, they're not capable really of doing that. We've diminished them. We've made them typically worse off in prison than better off. So we've got to look at these things. And the reason we look at it is fiscal, money-wise, and we look at it morally. Do we want someone spending their life in a cage? And then public safety is the biggest issue. If we can eliminate or lower the recidivism rate, right now it's about 50%. By the time in 3 years before they're back in trouble locally, statewide or federally, about half of the inmates, which is about 25,000 a year, typically getting out, about half of those in 3 years are back in trouble, which means there's victims of crime. And so it's a public safety, it should be top, in my opinion, it should be top of all our legislators. If it's public safety is one of the things that we advocate for, then this is an opportunity from a public safety standpoint to really make a difference.
Thank you. So I think that kind of then leads me to my next question, which I think you did already answer a little bit, but so was there any specific data or an example that specifically demonstrated the need for this policy change? How are you able to convince your colleagues in the legislature that this was a worthwhile investment?
Yeah, and I don't have data in front of me. I've been researching this for years. And believe me, it's not the only thing. Education opportunities in jail and prisons are not the only thing that we need. Back to my original thing when I talked about my personal life with post-release environment is critically important as well. But anecdotally, so I don't have any data in front of me, but anecdotally, we all understand that people with an education that have learned something are certainly going to have a better chance of success. That data is clear out there too. So don't have that in front of me, but I think we find too many people that would argue with that. And again, what kind of the points I brought up on a public safety issue to my colleagues, as well as a fiscal, it's an easy sell. It's not always easy to get stuff done because we got a lot of bills that get filed and a limited amount of time to get those done. So, but I was happy to make this happen. We had support. Certainly, we had the state colleges and other groups that were lobbying behind the scenes on this to my colleagues as well.
Right. Thank you. So then obviously right now we just focused on policy impacting correctional and juvenile justice systems, but in your opinion, are there any other populations that the state should focus on educating and preparing for the workforce?
Children. It's the biggest factor. So my other number one policy the last several years has been music in elementary education. And again, none of these are silver bullets. They solve all the problems. But if you look at what politicians, we typically look at yearly budget cycles, maybe 2-year election cycles, what's going to happen right away. And we get rewarded or criticized based on things that happen right now with immediate impacts. I've been in business a long time. My goal is to make money today. but I also want to be in business tomorrow. So I have to do things today besides just making a profit that would allow me to be in business down the road. So if we look at children, and the biggest impact that I think we can have is in a child's life to put them in a different direction. And all of these things, look, you're going to have a certain amount of people who get in trouble that, you know, they'll never get in trouble again. You'll have a certain amount of people who get in trouble and they'll always be in trouble. You have sociopaths and you have different issues out there, but you have a big, broad group of people who get in trouble that if they had a different environment, they wouldn't. So if you look at 4-year-olds, vocabulary alone, take that data, 4-year-olds at a low end, you have a vocabulary of about 500 words and a high end of about 1,100 words. By the time they're 6 years of age, that is about 4,000 words to over 15,000 words. And so in a 2-year period, we've had this explosion. The lower end have learned and gained some knowledge, but they are being left behind in a significant way by kids in a different environment. And this is not a genetic issue. This is 100% environmental, and the data shows this too. So what we have to do, the reason I have music is and my pilot program has part of the money going to the school districts. We have about 2,000 kids that are in the program right now. We're going into our our 4th year. COVID kind of threw us off a little bit, but it's a 3-year program. The second part of the funding goes to the University of Florida College of Education, and they're doing a study, and it's both a qualitative and quantitative study. And the schools are based around Alachua County in Marion County, and then one in Miami, where Florida International is also part of the study. So UF's College of Education is doing this study, and we hope to have data back that not only are there improvements in academics, but also is there a social setting where kids who come in so far behind and data shows them staying behind and never catching up, are they not only catching up academically, but are they assimilating into the classroom? Are they becoming part of a team and working in that? So that's pretty exciting because of some of the preliminary results we already have back to show that if we can change the direction of a child, then we solve many multitude of problems down the road. So I'm encouraging my colleagues and other people to advocate. So even in your field, Florida College Access Network. Okay, so how do you have the best access for kids? So you can do policy today that affects kids about to go into the college or not, give them a better chance. But what are we doing so in 15 years from now, you have a better chance of getting kids to come in to go to college that really don't need all the support that you may have to do now. So those are the long-term things that we tend not to focus on, but I think is imperative for the future.
I think that's important. Thank you for sharing. I know that recently I've seen the legislature put more of an emphasis also towards early learning and those initiatives too. So I think you obviously touched a little bit on the importance of that as well. Before we move on, we actually had a comment that I wanted to share with you that I don't know if I won't say the name just in case he doesn't want me to, but someone said that they facilitate life skills courses in Florida prisons. And that he agrees that this is a huge need for post-secondary education in our correctional institutes. So just wanted to share that with you. So thank you so much, Senator Perry. It's obviously going to be really exciting to hear about how this is going to expand those opportunities for those individuals in our correctional systems. And so then I want to just share to our audience, please remember to add your questions in and we'll get to them during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. And now we'll move on to our next speaker. Representative Mariano is with us here today. Good afternoon, Rep. Mariano. Thank you for joining us today to talk about 2 large education bills from this session, Senate Bill 7044 and Senate Bill 2524. So same first question I gave to Senator Perry. Before we get into the context of the bills, if you wouldn't mind talking to us a little bit about your district.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. My name's Amber Mariano. I'm from West Pasco County, just north of Tampa. I live in Hudson, and I have been representing District 36 since 2016. My district is along the coast of Pasco County, and I have a lot of retirees in my district. But they all still love higher education, and that's really what I spent a lot of my time focusing on. And yeah.
Thank you. So for our audience today, can you talk to us a little bit about how the provisions of Senate Bill 7044 will increase affordability and transparency for students who are pursuing post-secondary education?
Yeah, so this was a pretty comprehensive piece of legislation. I'll just highlight a few points, some of my favorite parts of the bill. One was it requires professors to post syllabi for classes so 30 or 45 days ahead of classes for general education courses. And that's huge. I assume you're all students, as you know, getting your syllabi the day class starts. Sometimes you don't know if that's a class you want to take anymore after you see the syllabi. And whether it's the schedule of the coursework doesn't really line up with the title or the course description or the material that you're reading, you don't maybe think are what should be being used for those courses, or it's just maybe it's heavy on a paper and you would rather do a presentation, and you can look at different classes and look at their syllabi and see what classes are best suited for your learning style. It also puts accountability on the professors as well to make sure they are providing students with the information and roadmap for their classes before the classes even start, so you can make the best informed choice as a consumer in what classes you want to take and where you want to spend your time. So that was a really great piece. We also had something similar related to textbook transparency. I just graduated my master's, and every time you register for a class, right, it links you to the bookstore to see what books are required. And it'll usually say what one book is required and these 5 books are recommended. And you really don't know which ones you really need to be buying, which ones you don't. Sometimes even the required ones you don't actually need to be buying. And so that's why that ties in so great with the syllabi, because you can kind of compare with, okay, is this reading even on my list for the schedule of the course? Or is this just a supplemental reading that maybe is not really relevant or necessary, to make your way through the course? And so having additional transparency on those published textbooks is great as well. And we also included in there, if a school is going to raise fees, they can't raise tuition, but if they're going to raise any fees, it requires a supermajority vote and also requires a detailed description of how the fee is currently being spent and why the increase is necessary. That way, when students, if they see their tuition and fees go up, they can look and see how those dollars are being spent and why the increase was necessary if it was. There are some other components of the bill, but those were really some key ones that were student focused to make sure that our process is transparent as possible for our students to be able to, the money they're spending on these classes, it's not or very affordable compared to some other states, but it's still a substantial amount of money. So we want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck and being able to choose the education that is best for you.
I think that's great, especially the point about the textbooks, knowing that it can be very easy to have those costs rack up very quickly when you do have obviously multiple books that, like you mentioned, are both required and recommended. You don't know which to get. So, and that actually leads me then to our next question. So the textbook affordability measures in this bill then combined with the expansion of open educational resources from 25-24 are obviously going to help students earn a credential without worrying so much about textbook costs. Can you talk a little bit about why this is such an important issue for you?
Yeah, open educational resources are a great tool for our students, but it's really on the professors to start utilizing them, and that is where a lot of the lag has been on. Students, of course, would love a free academic resource. If they don't have to buy an access code for their business class, that's $140, and they can log on and utilize openly available resources. And so I think that's where a lot of the pushback is. I had professors that, one that had just wrote his own book. It was for a political science class, and the book was 35 pages. And it was $120, and it was so small, and I'm like, $120, but it was his book in his class and you had to buy it. So clearly there's a lot a lot of like bad incentives there, right? To be able to require your students to buy your textbook and sometimes that's the best material that's out there, but trying to find a way to incentivize the professors and the deans of schools to be able to take those, of course, keeping in mind like copyright laws and stuff, but to take those resources that they're making students purchase and incentivize them to make them open access for all students. That way it's, they're paying their tuition and they're not having to worry about, okay, are my books going to be $200 a semester? Are they going to be $500? My husband's in law school, his textbooks last semester were $1,000. And so, clearly there's so much variation and the incentive is really not in the right place. And so I think that's why expanding those incentives in the open education resources is a really important thing to try and keep moving that in the right direction.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So then kind of moving into 25-24, that bill with the many parts that it has in place creates the pipeline and line funds to address our state's critical workforce shortage in nursing. Can you talk a little bit about what these funds do and how they'll increase the number of nurse practitioners and educators in Florida?
Yeah, so everyone's been talking about the nursing shortage for many years now, and with COVID-19, it's only been exacerbated. You see how much travel nurses are making, and so it's harder to even keep our nurses that we train here in Florida because they can go make 5 times the amount when they're traveling. And you look at so many people are actually leaving their current professions to go into nursing. Maybe they already have bachelor's degrees and they already have credentials, but they are now switching careers and they need to go back. And so they may already have a bachelor's degree, like a friend of mine. She had a bachelor's degree in biology and decided she wanted to actually go back and do nursing. And so, now they have to go back and basically get another bachelor's degree or at least an associate's degree to go and be an RN. And there are so many people that are trying to do this right now. And the problem is we don't have enough seats available for the students that actually want to go and enter nursing programs in our public institutions. There are private institutions out there. Obviously, the cost is much higher, but because of our low tuition in our universities and our colleges, it's, a lot of students really want to go there. But if you look at, we had a study done from the Board of Governors that showed how many qualified applicants there are at every school compared to how many they can accept. And that's whether it's due to lab space or faculty shortage or clinical placements available. Every school has their own unique issues to expand their programs. And that's something that we really needed to address because it's not a lack of individuals that want to go into nursing. That's not what causes the shortage. The shortage is actually because we have such a bottleneck in our institutions or people trying to get through to fill that workforce need. And so I was really happy that, this year we did pass the pipeline and line programs that it actually funded $125 million into nursing programs in our state in a variety of ways. One is a dollar for dollar match to help expand physically some of the programs, as well as some funds for faculty and all focused on trying to get more students through the program. So that was something that was really needed in our state. And $125 million is a lot of money, and honestly it won't even be enough to make sure all of those qualified applicants get in, but it's going to be a really great start to help get that momentum going and get these programs focused on expanding. If you look at UCF, it's the school I went to, and their most competitive major at the university to get into is nursing. And that's because there are just so many people that want to get in and they don't have enough room. You can fit as many political science students as you want really in a college. There's not a ton of resources that you need besides professors, but when it comes to nursing, you need lab space and you need like a 1-to-8 student teacher ratio and all these different requirements. So they are so much more expensive to build out than any other program, or most other programs at least. So those funds were really necessary, and I'm excited to see how they help move the issue forward.
I think that's really important. And I mean, I imagine obviously this can be something where if we continue obviously then to see the benefits in a couple of years that possibly the legislature might continue funding these funds. So that's really exciting news. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. But these bills are full of initiatives and policy changes that will ensure that Florida continues to deliver quality higher education. So now really quickly, I'll go into a brief discussion about an additional policy change and then provide some budget highlights, which of course I welcome either of you to chime in if either of you guys have any comments. So really quickly wanted to cover House Bill 461, which is Florida Bright Futures Scholarship Program student service requirements. This is a pretty simple bill that will expand the way Florida's high school students can receive the Bright Futures Award. So currently students have to complete a set amount of volunteer hours based on the tier they're aiming for in order to receive the award. Upon signing of this bill, however, now students can substitute any work experience that they have for the volunteer service component. This is definitely going to help a lot of our high school students that are working part-time jobs by removing additional pressure on their already packed schedules. Rep. Mariano, I think I heard you mention in committee at one point how helpful this would have been during your time in high school. So quickly want to offer up the space if either you or Senator Perry have any comments.
Yeah, this is a really great piece of legislation. I worked all through high school, and so I worked like 20 hours a week at a restaurant. I played 3 sports. I was very busy. I don't even know how I had time looking back to work, but it's hard if you're working and you're trying to, like for me, I had to work if I wanted to be able to drive. And so, that was a sacrifice I had to make. And it would have been great to be able to utilize all those hours I'm spending working to be able to go towards your Bright Futures requirement. And of course, there's something really great to say about volunteering in your community and what it teaches you. And that was why it was originally put into place. But for those families that they really don't have that choice, where sometimes the students have to work just to be able to help make ends meet in their family, this is a really good pathway for them to be able to still be eligible. I mean, it would really be a shame for someone to not get Bright Futures because of the hours requirement when they get the high test score and the high GPA. So this is really just a way to make sure it's as accessible as possible to all students.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I definitely agree. This is probably something that would have come in handy when I was in high school as well, since I also had a job. So I completely resonate with what you just shared with us. So then to go into some budget highlights, as mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, the legislature passed a record-breaking $112.1 billion budget, which is the largest in state history. So funding for major education pots are detailed on the screen, but some important parts to note are that the state university system received $3.53 billion. The Florida college system received $1.535 billion, and workforce education initiatives were funded at $583 million. Thanks to the hard work of the legislature, as Rep. Mariano mentioned before, we see this is another year where we don't have any tuition increases, which is a continued effort in keeping our higher education system affordable. Financial aid programs were vastly funded, with some major ones listed on the screen. EASE received $75.4 million, which will provide funding for almost 38,000 students across our state. Bright Futures was funded at $620.9 million. And a new program out of House Bill 3 this year is the Law Enforcement Academy Scholarship Program. This program allows for the recruitment of law enforcement officers by providing them with financial aid assistance when they enroll in a basic training program. The scholarship is awarded on a first-come, first-served basis and can be used to pay for tuition and fees. And then lastly, we see the pipeline and line funds that we just covered with Rep. Mariano that have been funded at $125 million total. And this is obviously going to foster collaboration between our nursing education providers and hospitals across the state. So again, if either of you guys wanted to mention anything about the budget, like I said, and it's obviously the biggest one that we've had, so I'm sure a lot of work went into this. Oh, Senator Perry, you're muted.
There you go. Sorry. Yeah, well, it was a pretty substantial year, not just for education, for every silo that we deal with. Just in my silo on criminal civil justice appropriations, we went from 6 billion to 7 billion. So it's a pretty major increase in that. So all I'm doing, one of the concerns we had on all of the funding mechanisms and the ones where there was higher education or not, while the state of Florida overall has been really good, the state stayed open. Our revenues have been up. Every single month we break what the estimating budget conference puts out there. So that's great. But there was still a lot of money in last year in this year's budget that was from the federal stimulus, which what we want to do is make sure that we didn't spend money that was a one-time shot in the arm. And you got to be really careful about how we spend money and start programs that you can't fund in the future. Or if you funded them, you may have to take it from some other area in the budget. So it was an incredible year. My first year up there in 2010, the state budget was 66.7 billion, I think. So you're talking about a significant amount of money over in just that 12-year period. So, all of these things are important. One of the things, and I think one of the things you have there is on the universities and the performance-based funding. We get, Representative Mariano and myself, we get judged by how much we spend. We don't get judged by results. So how much do you spend in education? How much do you spend in the environment? How much do you spend here? And people tend to pat us on the back if we spent more than we did last year. And they tend to criticize us if we spent less than we did last year. And sometimes spending money, we wouldn't go buy a product and say, oh, well, just because it costs more makes it better. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not true. And so it's up to us to make sure that where we're spending this money, that we're getting the results that we want. And that's a difficult thing to do. You mentioned earlier, we're a 60-day legislative session. Now we have about 2.5 months prior to that at committee meetings. But if you take all in, you got 4.5 months of us working and then trying to master all these things and understand that what's going on. So now Rep. Mariana is great. And thank you for working with me, Amber, on some of the stuff with education. It's right down her alley, been a huge advocate for these things. And so, but it's up to us, it's up to her and I and our colleagues to make sure, okay, this record budget, what is the taxpayer getting? What is the student getting? What are the results for the state of Florida? So a little harder to do than just say, here's the numbers, but certainly it starts with having better budgets to spend.
Yeah, it's a great point. And just to give a little more context too, to how our state compares to other states. For example, you look at Virginia. Virginia has 8 million people and their budget is $143 billion, where we have 22 million and our budget is 112 billion. So we're really wise with how we spend our money, and that's because we have low taxes here and we don't have a state income tax and all these different things. And so we have to be more efficient. Even with that efficiency, we still have the best higher education system in the country. So I think it's important to keep that in context to every other state that's out there, because we really do per person have a much lower budget than most other states, especially large states.
Awesome. Thank you to both of you for sharing that background a little bit with us. So now we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to put some in the chat and we'll try to get to them. I do see one here. Broadly talking about mental health, not just in higher education, but in K through 12. I know that's a little bit different than what we just covered here today, but if either of you might have any insight or something that you'd like to mention on the topic, I think that might help.
Yeah, I don't know, Amber, you can start. I'll start with that. So one of the troubling things I found when I first was elected and I was in the House, I found the amount of Baker Acts of juveniles had gone up tremendously year after year. Now there's some other, it's not totally on mental health conditions. Sometimes it's just that people were utilizing the state to solve problems that parents didn't want to deal with and other agencies didn't want to deal with. And so they were calling police and so forth when they didn't need to. But still, there's been a rise in certainly in these issues. This is probably one of the most, it shouldn't be, but one of the most controversial things. And I get debates, like I say, I have 2 young daughters, college age or just after. I think that, and I've read a lot of data on this, I think one of the biggest issues we have facing our state is whether we legalize marijuana as a recreational use. You can go back into studies that go back into the late 1800s and show young soldiers from England that were in India, occupying India and getting high on hashish and the mental health conditions, and does it. And there's people who have borderline psychosis and schizophrenia and stuff that certain things triggers things to happen. And I'm not saying pot is going to be the end all of some of this, but anything that we do to a child that can take psychosis or potential that and put it over the line. And I think we're going to have huge problems. We already have that. Look, my background, I won't go into my background, but I can tell you pot, alcohol, other drugs at a very young age. That's why I turned out to be a politician. It's a bad deal. No, just but we have to look at some of the environmental conditions. We can't, genetic issues are out there. They're real. We work with that. And I think there's some things that we can do from that, but we also have to look at all the environmental issues that affect that. And this is where my debate gets into my libertarian friends who they look at things and say, why would the state regulate marijuana? Why would they regulate anything? Why is the state involved in my business? Well, if we lived in a truly libertarian environment where you'd make your own decisions and you live by your own decisions, great. But the taxpayers fund for all of these issues. And so I think it's imperative, back to my music and elementary education, what are we doing with a child and what is going to give them the best chance of success? And to see bake racks, we had 1 year, I think they went up 40-some% in 1 year. And again, they've continually risen. So we're not on the right track to have these. And we see some of those, move all the way up. And these are rare, but we see a mass school shooting. We see what happened down in Parkland. Certainly those are rare, the extreme. But the ones you don't read about are the ones whose lives are potentially ruined or not productive. And then suicide rates amongst young people is expanding. And you want a tragic situation, meet with parents, and I meet with a lot of them on suicide rates. So I think there's lots of issues that we have to not be afraid to talk about. And we have to look at and say, are we ready for whatever policies that we're going to make that are going to have either a negative or positive impact on mental health conditions of young people?
Thank you so much. I have a question here about tuition costs. I know we touched on this a little bit, but how has the legislature been able to prioritize college affordability when we know that we live in a very diverse state with a lot of different issues and needs that need to be addressed?
Yeah, well, we haven't raised tuition in the state of Florida in at least 10 years, I believe. And that's because really the governors have put their foot down and said, we're not going to take any tuition increases, which I think is the right thing to do. And if you look at, Florida universities compared to other states, I mean, our out-of-state tuition is cheaper than a lot of states' in-state tuition for their public institutions. You can get, if you're commuting even to a state university, you can get a bachelor's degree for less than $25,000 and at a state college for less than $10,000. And so when you think about that, there are opportunities, a student can work their way through a higher education in Florida. In a lot of places, that's not the case, where you're going to have to be saddled with a ton of student loan debt. Now, if you're not working and you are taking out student loans, you're going to be able to come out really probably less than $50,000 and less than $30,000 at the college as well. So for students that, want to make the most of their opportunity, we've also put out the Bright Future Scholarship Program that when I first came into office, when I got Bright Futures, it only covered about 40% of your tuition. And so now it covers the full 100% or 75%, depending on what level you get. And that is a game changer for so many students that, you can go to any of our top tier universities with a full ride. And that's not even including what those institutions themselves will give you, depending on where you're at. You can get a scholarship on top of that, a merit scholarship or financial aid, like through a Pell Grant, depending on what your financial need is. So, I mean, our system is very, very affordable and it's accessible for anyone, especially due to our state colleges being so regionally focused and offering bachelor's degrees and things that are necessary in that region. So we really do have one of the most affordable systems out there. And there are so many different pathways for students to be able to graduate debt-free from here in Florida.
Thank you for sharing. I think that is definitely something that continues to make Florida a place that a lot of people probably out of state would like to come to because it is so affordable, like you mentioned. So I have a question here for Senator Perry. So we saw that 722 passed unanimously. So I know sometimes that tends to be rare on certain occasions. So why do you think inmate education was uniquely able to gain bipartisan support?
Yeah, and actually that's a misnomer. Most of our bills are bipartisan, the majority. The media, controversy sells, and so the media is only going to talk about the ones that are controversial. But we probably, and Amber, I don't know if you know the number, but of all the bills that I file, most of mine are non-controversial, or bipartisan. And so, like I say, the media loves controversy, and they're not going to talk about some of these other bills. But that one, again, it's not that they're controversial as much. Those are big issues, but there's only a handful of those every year. What they are is just really amount of time. How much time do you have? We have over 2,000 bills get filed, 3,000 something if you take in all the budget issues as well. And I think we passed 280 or 290, which was quite a bit. Quite a few bills, but really, less than 10% of every bill that gets filed even gets a hearing. So, anyway, so we're, we just, it's our goal, and it's Representative Mariano's goal, is to go out to our colleagues and find stuff that we think is, we can get passed, and then what kind of impact is it going to have, and try to focus on those bills and get them passed. And, but that's our job. If you're up there in Tallahassee, you're going to see us going to our colleagues and trying to get chairs to agenda the bill and put it on there and make it happen. And it's a lot of competition in a short amount of time.
Thank you. So I have a question here about pipeline and line funds for Rep. Mariano. How long do you think it will take these funds to help the nursing shortage? And do you anticipate a similar investment next year?
Great question. They are grant programs, so the schools are going to have to apply for those funds. I think a lot of them will probably be looking at those grants that are out there and proactively just starting, because they all do want to expand. But I would say in the next year or two, it should, start being dispersed fully and being utilized by the institutions. I don't know if there will be an addition to those funds in coming years. Like Senator Perry had kind of mentioned, with the COVID relief funds, we did have a lot of one-time uses. And so I think this was a really great way to have a lasting impact in being able to help with the expansion of those programs. And then they will be sustained, through tuition and different things. So, I think it'll be pretty quick that we'll start seeing the impacts. And I think there was a lot of individual projects as well for nursing schools. I actually had a project for UCF to have a new nursing building, and another one for Kaiser University to have some more nursing programs. And those are just the ones that I worked on. So I'm sure there was plenty others, and those will be, if the governor signs them when he signs the budget, those will be immediate as well. So I think it's going to, give schools a lot of hope to be able to quickly start expanding, and they can look at what they can use their resources and leverage their resources to get ready to get those grant funds.
Awesome, thank you. So I have a question here. So someone has mentioned that states like Texas assume the incarcerated population are in-state residents for tuition purposes. but according to our review here, Florida does not. Many individuals don't have access to documentation to show that they're in-state residents. So this might separate them from accessing in-state tuition rates. So if this is something that you think might be a topic or a bill to be filed for an upcoming session. I know that's very head of the game, but
Yeah, I'm not real familiar with how they do that. I know a lot of them couldn't afford to go pay either one. There has to be subsidies, but maybe Rep. Mariana, are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not familiar either, but definitely feel free to reach out and we can maybe have a further discussion on that. You know, I'm not sure if I fully understand, you know, if they're incarcerated, how they'll be attending. I know they do have some they do have some programs in each of the institutions as well, like for GED and those type of things. But yeah, I would love to know more about that and try and learn. So feel free to reach out and set up a meeting and we can further discuss and look at the opportunities for next year.
Yeah, and just let the person who asked the question know, we don't know issues, right? I mean, we know some, but we're got a pretty broad area that we have to be kind of experts in. And so we're not going to know a lot of these things. So if people come to us and they say, here's an issue, and they've investigated it and they've looked at other states, especially, you know, I had a guy in my office the other day that had a couple of different states with some policy changes. And he said, if the state could do this, it'd be really beneficial. So this is how you can be involved in the process. So anybody listening who looks at something and says, but this is where you have to help us, because we're kind of a little overwhelmed and we have small staffs that with a lot of things to look at. But if they can come and say, yeah, here's what Texas does, here's how they do it, you can even look up the statutes and figure that out, then myself and Amber and other colleagues who care about this kind of thing would be interested in running legislation to help fix that.
thank you. So I have one last question for both of you before we conclude. So if you guys would like to share your highlight of this year's legislative session.
Sure.
No, go ahead, Amber.
Go ahead.
No, you're up.
Okay. So, you know, I would say the nursing funding was a really big win for Florida. That's something I've worked a lot on as I'm the chair of like the higher ed policy committee. And so, you know, I see so many students that are going back to be nurses, and I really wanted to try and help exacerbate the problem in the healthcare industry and in higher ed all in one. So I think that was probably one of the highlights for this year, as well as the higher ed bill that we talked about, 7044, that helps with the transparency and syllabi and textbook affordability, and also works on accreditation. So it was a very successful year in higher ed, and look forward to hopefully making some more strides next year.
Yeah, so I had the music and ed that I brought up the first time to get continued funding for that. I got the governor. Of course, the governor has small children, so he made it. He really wanted to understand it and was an advocate for it as well. So that was really encouraging to have that. We did a bill, it's a real simple bill called Juvenile Expunction, where it took kids who, right now under state law, if you had a misdemeanor and you went through a diversionary program, which means the judge and the prosecutor, everybody agreed that you wouldn't really go into the criminal justice system, you could go through a deferred program. Once you completed that, your record was expunged. We found in felonies that the record was not expunged. And so they had, even though they were never adjudicated guilty, they would still have a felony arrest record that could follow them around for years and to get that off. So getting that passed, that affects about 26,000 potential people that really will make a difference when they're putting in for job applications or applying to go to school or whatever else. So to that, I think the budget, we looked at, of course, I represent the state of Florida, but my district with the University of Florida and Santa Fe College and the other colleges, able to get some good funding, both in capital areas and other things was important. So it was a good bill. I think we filed about 40 bills. I need to go back to the House. You can only file 7 over there. It's great. And we passed about 15 different pieces of legislation affecting a lot of different areas of the state. I would like to close the one last thing you talked about, going back and up to your budgets and what the state spends, and you'd mentioned on the state. So just direct state funding, if you break that down to per student, you're going to find that the universities are just under $9,000 a student. State colleges are just about $5,000. And so what we have to do is look at, you know, some kids should never go to either one. They should go straight, they go to trade schools, or they can do something else. But a lot of kids can go into a state college and come out and with much less debt. It's much cheaper for the state of Florida, and they can have careers. You know, I have a company, I have no higher ed, and I've got 120 people work for me, and we do about $22 million in revenue from this little roofing business. So there's lots of opportunities, and we need to make sure that kids in the K through 12 understand what those opportunities are, and try to guide them. So you don't need to get a 4-year degree and have a debt and have a job that you really can't ever pay that back. That doesn't happen a lot, but it certainly happens sometimes. So looking at what we want to take young people and educate them, and I don't want to ever try to impose my beliefs or feelings on anybody. I want to give them opportunities and educate them so they can make that decision on what's best for the direction of their lives. So with the state colleges, is bang for the buck for the state is well, a pretty good deal.
Well, thank you for sharing, and obviously congratulations to both of you on the wins that you guys had this session. So that concludes the end of our webinar today. So I want to thank Senator Perry and Representative Mariano for joining us today as we learned more about new legislation that stands to impact Florida students, and for their tireless efforts to expand educational opportunities in Florida. This is the end of our webinar today, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.